Thank you very much. On behalf of my son-in-law, Jamil Ahmed, I wish you assalamu alaikum. And on behalf of my daughter, Jennifer Eichel Dubrow, I wish you all shalom. I'm coming to this project from a somewhat different perspective, and I want to be very clear that this is certainly by far not the only perspective. This is one perspective on this issue. One of my specialties is working, and you'll hear the next speaker, Dr. Michael Langoni from the International Cultic Studies Association. One of my specialties has to do with the psychology of cults or cultic groups. That includes religious groups, it includes political cults, it includes marketing cults, it includes therapy cults or psychological cults. What's going on? Okay, thank you. And among the many various forms of cultic groups that I have been involved with or that I've studied have been two individuals who I determined and some other people have determined were essentially involved in Islamic-based cultic groups. The first individual probably a lot of you are aware of, and that's Lee Boyd Malvo, who's the Beltway sniper. And I'll be talking about him to some degree, in some detail. The second individual is Abdul Adam, and I want to be real clear here. He was a member of the Hanafi Muslim group that is not Hanafi Muslim. All right. In other words, this was a very, very small Islamic cult based in Washington D.C., not to be confused with the large Islamic sect, the Hanafi Muslims. So I want to be real clear about that. So let me talk a little bit about Lee Boyd Malvo. First of all, Lee Boyd Malvo was considered his mentor, so to speak, was John Muhammad, who was fairly recently executed. During, those of you may remember, in October 2002, there was quite a reign of terror. During a three-week period, 10 people were shot and killed, 3 critically injured, all apparently at random in various regions throughout the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. Eventually, John Muhammad and Lee Boyd Malvo were discovered and were arrested. It came out later on that they were actually responsible for additional murders, at least 3 additional murders. And as this story unfolded, Lee Boyd Malvo, who did admit to being the primary sniper, although not the only sniper, he later on recanted. Initially, he said he was the only person to fire the weapons, but he later on recanted that. Malvo was a teenager when he was recruited by John Muhammad, and Muhammad was actually searching for a young protege to engage in his individual acts of terrorism. So Lee Boyd Malvo was actually his 3rd attempt to convert somebody, and his successful attempt, unfortunately. So he was recruited for by John Muhammad, that is, for the express purpose of fulfilling this vision that he had of starting a race war, somewhat similar to Charles Manson's Helter Skelter. For those of you who are my age or older, you may remember that. The goal was that this would eventually result in the establishment of an exclusively black African-American Islamic state in Central Canada, with John Muhammad as the Khalifa. Malvo was his 3rd recruit, as I said. 2 other youths were previously trained, but they did not pass muster. Now that is what Lee Boyd Malvo believed, and still believes to this day, I'm told. There are others who feel that this was a concoction on John Muhammad's part, that in reality what he wanted to do was to kill his ex-wife and do that and obscure his guilt by killing a lot of other people, so that it would appear his wife was just another random victim. So we'll never know what the truth was, because the truth died with John Muhammad. But certainly that is what Lee Boyd Malvo believed. to understand how somebody gets recruited into this situation, into the situation of essentially an American domestically born cult, religious cult of only two people, all right, John Muhammad and Lee Boyd Malvo. We need to look into Lee Boyd Malvo's background, and I'm not going to go into it. We don't have enough time to go into it in great detail here. I'll just say that this was a young man who was starved for attention, starved for a male leader, a male leadership and role model. And John Muhammad was an individual who was very consciously and deliberately seeking such a boy. He went to the Caribbean for that express purpose, figuring that that would be a good place to find somebody. And in fact, he did find him. He then he brought Malvo to the United States illegally and subjected Malvo to a very, very intensive indoctrination program. I'm not going to have time to get into it in great detail, but I'll just say that it involved the usual forms of the usual characteristics of indoctrination that I think probably Dr. Langoni is going to go into in somewhat greater detail, of isolating him, bombarding him with information from only one point of view, breaking his family ties. He was close to his mother, and initially Muhammad said that he would bring his mother to the United States. She did in fact come to the United States, but Muhammad kept Malvo away from his mother, so he was isolated from all his old contacts. This is why I use a Macintosh. Okay. Anyway, I'm going to move on here and keep going. So, eventually Malvo was arrested, as you all know. He initially confessed to being the lone shooter in all the killings, while John Muhammad only acted as the spotter. This was a deliberately planned between Malvo and John Muhammad to protect John Muhammad from getting the death penalty. He continued, Malvo that is, continued for several months while he was incarcerated to profess his complete faith and belief in his father. In fact, he referred to himself as, not as Lee Boyd Malvo, but rather as John Malvo, named after John Muhammad. He is initially introduced to his defense team, which included attorney Craig Cooley and psychologist Dewey Cornell, as well as a mitigation specialist and several other legal and mental health assistants and paraprofessionals. It seemed pretty clear that he may have developed a bit of a crush on one of those individuals, which certainly assisted in his eventual deprogramming, so to speak. Dr. Cornell and the defense team members at that time did not really, they weren't looking at Lee Boyd Malvo as a indoctrinated victim of essentially a cult leader. They were just trying to establish rapport with him. They were just trying to establish a relationship with him, and they did that successfully. Dr. Cornell himself spent well over 40 hours with Malvo, and little by little, Malvo began to question his beliefs, his philosophy, and the methods of John Muhammad. So over a period of several months, basically Malvo was informally deprogrammed. Now, by then, Dewey Cornell was in touch with Dr. Paul Martin, who's another cult specialist, unfortunately deceased at this time, and got in touch with me, and we collaborated in helping Dr. Cornell, Dr. Dewey rather, to essentially engage Malvo in what I would call a long deprogramming. Approximately 9 months into his incarceration, Malvo did in fact renounce Muhammad and his extremist form of Islam. It's very important to note that he had never renounced Islam. And in fact, there were several imams who visited him in prison and helped him to come to a better understanding of Islam. During his trial, Malvo pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. We used an indoctrination or a brainwashing defense. He was, however, convicted of murder. However, we are generally credited with at least having kept him from receiving the death penalty.